afternoon, and welcome to this very interesting session on scaling private sector infrastructure in the form of PPP. I'm Vivek Mittal, CEO of Africa Infrastructure Development Association, and I have the great pleasure of moderating this panel with three excellent guests. They are respectively Judy Kobus from co-head of infrastructure sector at RMB. With Lara Bezuidenhout from Vaskins, did I get that right? And Bamidele Oseni from Caleb Consulting in Uganda. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. At the start, before I introduce everybody, I'd like to say to everybody who's listening in, the audience, please use the chat function on your Zoom or whatever application you're using this on liberally to make comments or better still ask interesting questions that the speakers may not be able to answer properly. It's always good to put people on the spot. So without further ado, may I briefly ask each of you to introduce, what you're looking forward to from this year and the next couple of years in your business. Judy from RMB, would you like to talk about what you're doing, followed by Lara, and then finally Bamidele?
Good day to you, Vivek, and to my fellow panelists. So from RMB's perspective, what we're looking for over the short to medium term is the RMIPP, so the risk mitigation program that is currently expected to close in July. We were appointed as MLAs for two projects that are currently awarded there. We are also looking forward to REAP Round 5 that's currently in the bidding phase and is expected to bid in August. We are also looking quite a lot in Ghana, in particular, the rail sector and the reforms there and the projects that are coming out of there. We are also very, very keen around this energy transition story that is currently playing out, not just in South Africa, but I'd say in SADC. And we're currently looking at some gas pipeline projects that are currently out of the market. In the longer term, I'd say that we are looking forward to seeing some of the projects that are currently being developed by the Infrastructure Fund coming to market. We understand that they're still in project preparation, so it might take some time to come to market. Also, we were very much encouraged by Infrastructure SA and the 64 projects that they gazetted as priorities last year. We understand there's a lot of project development that's happening there, and we are looking forward to that. So shorter term, it seems that the story, at least I'd say in SADC, is around energy, power, and oil and gas. And I think then longer term, we should start seeing other economic infrastructure starting to come to market for procurement. So the sectors that we're watching quite closely are the transportation sectors, which have been prioritized in South Africa in particular. And also the water sector as well. And as I said, as I mentioned earlier, in Ghana, we are watching the rail sector closely, and we continue to also monitor the energy sector in the rest of the continent as well.
Thank you very much, Judy. Lara, would you like to come in?
It's going to be hard to say something different, Judy. My little list was water, President's Strategic Infrastructure Summit from last year, and the list of projects that have been gazetted. But I guess that's because we are all swimming in the same sea or pond, depending on how you see things. I agree with you, Judy. The electrification space is probably going to be a long story, and it's an interesting story, and I really do hope that the little shoots that we're seeing elsewhere on the continent begin to grow as the South African renewables program has grown. Not necessarily in the same way, but it certainly seems to me that following on the mobile phone, what shall we say, new world that was opened by mobile phones everywhere in the world, but on this continent, I think it's been miraculous. If electricity on a fairly stable and affordable basis can find its way into smaller parts, villages and small towns, and even cities that are not properly electrified on this continent, you can just imagine that the internet connectivity will change the lives of young people in particular forever. And I think that's the kind of thing that's really exciting for me, is seeing these clever tech projects that can, just rely on a little booth with a little bit of a solar panel, and you can buy a cell phone, you can recharge your you could charge your cell phone, you can recharge your SIM card, and that opens up so many opportunities for people who otherwise would not be able to move forward. So that's exciting. I personally would love to be involved in transport projects a bit more. It's probably kind of my first love, and I do believe that urban developments change lives quickly and fundamentally. And it's going to be interesting to watch the space in South Africa. Sorry, Vivek, I know you asked us to move away, but it's interesting that the South African toll road, the early concessions are all coming up for around 25 years or so, somewhere between 20 and 25, and they're 30-year concessions. So it's going to be very interesting to watch that space and see what happens with those concessions. I can't actually believe that I will still be sitting in my chair when they move into their retirement. But that's as it is. And if you look at something like the Maputo toll road, and the impact that development has had on both economies, it's nothing short of remarkable, and I really hope that we can see more of that on the continent, whether it's road or rail. Yeah, that's what grew America in the 100 years ago, and I think we could do with some of that.
Actually, I'll come back. That's an interesting theme. Actually, the additionality, the additional gains from infrastructure, and that's a theme I'll come back to. But before we, Bamidele, would you like to tell us a little bit about what is it that you're looking for, interesting stuff that you worked on in the last couple of years, and what you're looking forward to?
Thank you very much. One thing I've discovered as a chartered accountant and chief credit officer and a risk management professional in Pan-African countries in the last 5 years is that aside Nigeria, where there is serious interest in financing power projects, many other African countries where I work, the banks are being skeptical toward financing power projects simply because of the fact of the ticket size amount. Most of the time it's always syndication, and syndication comes with a lot of bureaucracy, delay, and all sort of things like that, that often are not. Financing becoming a challenge. At the end of the day, a client requests for a finance to do a power project, do a road construction. It couldn't make it because it takes a long time. I'm not syndicating banks to agree on a decision. So my take here is to be able to provide more support for these banks in terms of knowledge, because basically the reason why I discovered that why there's this delay is that there's a sort of knowledge gap in terms of where there's no knowledge gap, the banks cannot see the return on the investment in terms of immediate returns. What they are saying is 25 years. What they are saying is that, okay, I don't want to get involved directly. So my take here is to be able, as a consultant, as a professional who has financed this power project before and took months to get it approved, is to first of all be able to get more information on why, especially how these projects can be broken down into phases, such that the finance institution can begin to see immediate return vis-a-vis, not they don't have to wait for 5 years to 4 years before this thing come up. So these are basically for me, and to be able to come up with a risk matrix, the key risk and mitigant matrix vis-a-vis most of these power projects, because basically my interest is in power, in transportation, and road and construction. For instance, South Sudan are just coming out of 5 years, 7 years political logjam. They are interested in a lot of infrastructure vis-a-vis the road and construction, and banks that I work with are looking for how they can get finance to be able to, they can get a finance, additional capital to be able to do that construction, to support this funding road construction. For here in Uganda, it's been very interesting. The public-private partnership has worked for power. Women has done fantastically well. Government and women has done it fantastically well. On the road construction, it's not been that. It's been more of, and this is where my questions come. It's been more of the partner, the private sector, putting more investment, because you see Chinese coming to Uganda and say, give us this, we will help you to do this road and that, and which is one of the key risks, basically one of the key risks in this project, project risk, because when it's coming from the private sector alone, and the bank and the government is not that strictly involved, there is likely that as we go, the project might likely get to eat a snack. So basically, for me, I want to be able to, number one, get more information of how somebody like Julie, how you have done it successfully well in South Africa. Nigeria, I've not been working in Nigeria in the last 10 years. I've been working in Africa, East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa. So basically, I'm in more of Pan-Africa aside Nigeria. So Nigeria has done very well, but I've not worked in Nigeria in the last 10 years. So this is where I'm coming from. But I also noticed, aside South Africa and Nigeria, other African countries are still trying to. For instance, I never financed any power projects when I was in Kenya, in I&M Bank. There was none of that. There was nothing like water projects. They are basically trade finance and things they are doing. In Uganda, banks are basically not involved in this project. And basically because there's a lot of information and knowledge gap, and they cannot seek a risk. So I'm hoping that at the end of this season, from people like Julie and Flora, we can see how you have been doing it, such that RMB is still getting involved in this project, and they're making a lot of returns.
I get that, and you're talking about speed of financial closure and access to
finance.
Access to bank finance, but actually there's more. I mean, there's equity as well, and we're missing equity on this panel, but I can talk a little bit about that in a moment. So thank you for setting that up as a discussion point. There's a few themes that have come out. There are a few others. As a next round, I mean, starting with Lara, how have you seen COVID? There's the health crisis, of course, but there's also the economic fallout of that and across Africa. How have you seen that effect, and what are the interesting solutions that have come out to deal with this?
I'm not sure I can answer you, Vivek. I mean, we've seen, speaking as a lawyer, a lot of my time last year was spent digging deep into questions of force majeure, which honestly, none of us have never really, most of us have never thought in too much detail about force majeure. I have had an argument, for example, with one bank client many years ago about whether pirates attacking ships on the west coast was something worth arguing about in a force majeure clause or not. But usually, historically, we would just gloss over those. Up to a point, you'd sort of see that the key things were there, but no one had really had terribly much experience with force majeure, because disastrous events have usually been covered by insurance. So I know I'm not answering your question exactly because I think you're asking a macro question, and I can't answer that. Except to say this, that the concessions and public-private partnerships that I'm involved in, and that's and I'm really talking about those that are well into their term, because I have a number of concession companies or their lenders who are clients of mine and are, you know, well into their concession businesses, into their terms, have all survived. So I think that's you know, that's tick one for public-private partnerships, and I'll talk about them, you know, not necessarily a classic PPP, but including IPPs and you know, the model more generically. They have survived, and I think that is partly about the discipline that is brought to bear in negotiating the key contracts. And so when I say that historically we didn't spend terribly much time as negotiating teams on force majeure, that's not to say we didn't care about it. It was kind of there, it was standard, but we never had to go back to it. Spent a lot of time last year digging around into those force majeure clauses and trying to work out what the implications were, and was there a claim and wasn't there a claim, and if there was, what would you do? But in the final analysis, I can tell you that I don't know, and maybe Judy does, but I can't think of a single one of these infrastructure public-private partnership type projects that I'm involved in or know about that took a serious hit because of COVID. They managed, they all survived, maybe didn't come out the other end with exactly the revenue they'd expected, but somehow there was a way through the contracts. And the thing that I always like to remind people is about the third P in PPP, which is partnership. And so I do think that somewhere between the contracts and the kind of, we're together in this attitude between the contracting parties, and that that includes banks, government, and the private entities. They seem to have survived COVID well.
Well, I mean, thanks for that, Laura. I'll put some more flesh on the bones on this topic, and it comes out. I mean, there's a perception with people who have projects in countries that there are lots of projects. There's no shortage of projects. There's a perception with people who have money, and I mean, banks and equity investors and corporates, that there's a lot of capital, but they don't find investable projects in Africa. So that's what this is going to, because to your point. Actually, the ongoing study that S&P and Moody's have been doing since the 90s suggests that actually African infrastructure, the African PPP projects, tend to have amongst the lowest rates of default. They tend to have, and Judy will know this well from, sorry, her banking. The solvency requirements that banks go through. And in fact, only the Middle East enjoys a slightly lower default rate than Africa. But still, there's this risk perception that perhaps is not that fair. On the other side, concessions do get challenged, very, very robustly put, well-mitigated concessions do get challenged. And we've seen that in the last year as a result of COVID, even before COVID. So we've seen a fairly confrontational process in Ghana in the power sector, which I mean, as somehow everybody's landed on their feet, but not after spending quite a lot of time and money on legal advice to defend already very solid. Uganda went through a restructuring, which was actually quite friendly and productive. Kenya is currently there's a presidential task force that's reviewing, doing the full medical on power projects, past, present, and future. So that's one of the consequences of governments being stretched in terms of borrowing. There's potentially some overcapacity. It's highlighting issues of planning from the government side. So there are these sort of issues that keep coming up. And Judy, I mean, the reason for putting this out, because it hits what Bamidele said, and I'll come to Bamidele in a moment. But Judy, do you want to reflect on What is RMB's experience being, having gone through the Ghana process? And I don't know whether you have exposure in Kenya right now. Zambia is another country that's going through a lot of difficulty. What is your view of Africa in this post-COVID fallout world?
Yeah, sorry, Vivek. I absolutely echo. I echo what you say. That, I mean, what's positive about it is that although we've gone through quite a tough process in those jurisdictions, right? The deal still stood. You know, the risk mitigation still stood. You know, the deals were able to withstand challenge, right? But what's unfortunate about it is that when you close these deals, you almost like expect that they will basically go the way that they were planned to go, you know, from the outset, at least from the government side. So it does show that there is some risk which can affect banks in terms of the work that they do, in terms of these jurisdictions, and also shareholders, because as we said, I mean, we invest in these projects, so we lend to these projects expecting to basically get a particular return or be in these projects for a particular period of time. But when these issues come up in the middle of a project, it is alarming, although the contractual structure for our deals, I mean, has definitely stood, you know, after being tested. And going back to your original question, we think that the post-COVID, or we're not post-COVID yet, you know, but in COVID world that we're living in the continent, is there are positives that have come out in our space. As Lara says, I mean, I absolutely agree with Lara that the infrastructure asset class has shown itself to be very resilient. So not just contractually resilient, but also the partnership, you know, has shown itself to be quite resilient in terms of the public and the private sector, because there were some deals where, I mean, there's usually, I mean, in standardization, I'll say, in terms of South African PPPs, that if there's a protracted force majeure, any party can terminate, right? We haven't seen any PPP really getting terminated in South Africa. Also, I think that it's forced the various governments in the continent, you know, to focus the mind, because now you can't be having thousands and thousands of projects that you are developing at any given point in time. It's forced governments to basically think about what are the sectors that we should be prioritizing. And these sectors, what do they do in terms of economic growth and job creation? So in terms of prioritizing the sectors that have the largest multiplier effect in terms of economic growth, and then focusing on developing and preparing those types of projects, which we think is quite positive, because then it allows all investors to basically plan in terms of what are the types of projects that are going to be coming out of the various jurisdictions in the continent, and actually attract interest and investment as well. So I think that, I mean, we've seen that, I mean, sorry to use South Africa as well, we've seen it in SA with both the Infrastructure Fund and Infrastructure SA in the presidency, basically coming out and saying, listen, these are the sectors that we are prioritizing. And based on the work that we've done as FirstRand, I mean, we think that the sectors that are being prioritized are absolutely the right ones in terms of the economic multiplier effect. So in terms of energy, in terms of transportation, water and sanitation, ICT and ICT related infrastructure, and then maybe a little bit of social infrastructure as well being prioritized. But right now, to recover from the decimation of on the economies of the continent as a result of COVID, it is important that the governments focus the mind in terms of which projects they're going to prioritize from which sectors that will basically lead to, as I said, economic growth and job creation.
So that's the master plan that you're talking about, which South Africa's done marvelously well at. Sorry, but Judy, I mean, how would you respond to Bamidele in terms of why does it take a normal, a teeny weeny project take such a long time to get through financial close? And do you see that changing? Is it becoming worse? What are the clever ideas to make them make the path to financial close a little easier?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an issue across the continent. I mean, I think PPPs in particular take a very, very long time to close. I think it's a number of issues, right? But I think the biggest one is skill shortages. I think that PPPs are very, very complex to deliver, and are very complex to deliver both from the public side of PPP and the private side of PPP. And what we find is that there has been, because so few PPPs have been implemented, right? Those skills are not necessarily readily available. And we are assisting certain PPP units in the rest of the continent around those skills as well. But also we've seen in the SA context that there has been an exodus of those skills over the years because of the fact that over the last decade, I mean, virtually no PPPs were delivered. Yes, we did have the renewable energy IPP program, but in terms of PPPs, none were delivered. We also think that in terms of the legislation and regulation around PPPs as well, I think that it's very, very complex. I think it's to deal maybe with issues around corruption or an improper procurement process, but then the unintended consequence of that legislation is that it is very, very complex, which then leads, to the skills that are required to implement it. I also think that in terms of the projects that we prioritize generally, I mean, because there are usually various levels of government in any country that you go to really in the continent, you'll find that there aren't any national real priorities, per country in terms of what are we going to use these limited skills that we have and the limited resources that we have to deliver as well. And because of the fact that there isn't volume, right? You find that also you don't have necessarily an industry around PPPs. Like you look at SA now, our construction industry has been absolutely decimated because of lack of delivery, right? But then also when you look at the continent, I mean the rest of the continent, sorry, that you're not finding a lot of local players that are able to deliver. So you find that you actually have to ship in, contractors from the rest of the world to be, which also brings certain complexities as well, right? But I think that if I had to summarize it, I'd say it's skills shortage, maybe insufficient prioritization frameworks in terms of what must get delivered as well in a country. I also think that in terms of feasibility, and then we see this quite a lot in the SA context, that feasibility for a PPP could take about 4 years. I mean, it could take a long time before it even comes to market, right? And once the project comes to RFP, to market, so request for proposals, the expectation that government has, as opposed to what private sector can deliver, is chalk and cheese in terms of affordability.
I think that's. I'm sorry to cut in there. I'm sorry to cut in there because I should get Bamidele to come in as well. But I think that's the key point in that, by the time a deal comes to banks, it is already it's pretty well cooked, all in the wrong manner. So you got to send it back to the beginning of the conveyor belt to bring it back. That's been the experience. And
then sometimes you send it back, sorry, Vivek, and then it's another 4 years, that takes for it to come back to market.
But how much of this is, I mean, of course, you don't, there isn't a precedent of commercial banks taking on project financing entirely on their own. How much of this delay is also due to DFIs? Do you think the DFIs who come in alongside yourselves, can they do a better job? Are there things that they could be doing better? And this is all going to Bamidele's point of speeding up.
I think DFIs can do better maybe in the project preparation side of things. So before even the commercial banks are involved, I think that in terms of, I mean, what I mentioned around the skill shortages in government, I think that's a gap that could potentially be helped, and be bridged by DFIs. I think that maybe DFIs can do a lot more of project prep funding as well, and a lot more on helping structure bankable deals, because the DFIs also do come in on the other side before the deals get to financial close, post feasibility. But I think DFIs maybe can assist a lot more. They are assisting through various bodies, and also on a bilateral basis with government. I note, in terms of like IPSA or the DBSA and stuff. But I think that a lot more can be done at the project prep phase by DFIs.
So, Bamidele, I'm going to call you in a second. But before I do that, we are halfway through this now. I remind all the audience listening in to liberally use the chat function for questions, Q&A and comments. And I'll preface it as such, Bamidele. I mean, one of the points you could pick up is, so you've heard from Judy and Lara about the complexity of putting these projects together, the fact that they're probably not put together in a bankable manner to start with, and they have to be redone. From your point of view, have you seen domestic finance capacity come in? Is that going to be helpful or a hindrance in scaling? Because we're dealing with quite a big gap. I mean, we need to double the rate of, currently we have about $15 to $20 billion invested in PPPs across sub-Saharan Africa every year. It needs to be, 40 to 50 billion every year. So in terms of, increasing the speed at which things go, we've already got skills shortage, lack of a full, a meaningful master plan, if you will, to put these things together. But from your point of view, Bamidele, what are the other ideas that you're seeing, and how have you found your business in this COVID era?
Well, first of all, COVID-19 has changed the paradigm. It's a paradigm shift. That's what I've discovered. It's a total paradigm shift, the way we do business, the way we do things. So that's why I quite agree that projects have to be prioritized now, because you need more projects related to hospitals right now. We know more hospitals that can take care of COVID-19 cases. We got most of, like for instance, in Uganda now, we are on partial lockdown for another 42 days. So transports maybe. So basically for me, I think the main challenge, I want to take it from what Judy said. I don't think DFIs can also support to the, because I also noticed one of the projects I was talking about, actually there was a DFI, and because the project was not properly planned and the selection was not done properly, they went to DFI, and DFI was not ready for the construction phase, and that's how they came from. They came to those banks. So you can see, I think one of the challenges of the project I see most of the time right now, for those cases I've involved, is that they are poor planning from the SPV's perspective, the private sectors, coming to the bank when they see there is a poor planning, project selection was not properly done, and when they are properly done, the cost was not all inclusive. One of the challenges that they are not all cost inclusive. And you see that somebody is asking for a power project financing, and it's not all equipment required were not actually costed. And at the end of the day, when the bank is analyzing, discovering that there's a gap, they say, okay, how are you going to? There's a gap of finance and gap of costing. So the finance we are looking for cannot even cannot even finish the project. So if you cannot finish the project, you can't get the return. So from that perspective, the bank throws it away and throws it back. So I think the way I will see DFI coming in this matter is that DFIs or the multinational development institution can come in from the skill perspective to support the financial institution. And then where there's a domestic funds, financial for all, like African infrastructure development, where you have a large pool of funds, where that's also helpful. But basically, for me, most of the challenges is poor planning, project selection, cost is not inclusive. Number two is there is also from the government perspective. You know, you look at it, for instance, you look at a government, when you have financed those kind of projects, what comes to you is that what is the country risk rating? This is a high risk country, and you are financing a power project. If something happens, violence, turbulence, what happened to the funds of the bank? So banks most of the time are not interested just only in, they want to know the risk of the country, they call it risk rating. They want to know the risk of the project, what is the risk in the project, and they want to know the risk of the industry. That's why you see most of the banks are more interested in power and road construction. But when they've understood the risk and the mitigant there, and they discover that the country that is requesting for this one is an high-risk country, it became difficult. And that's why you now request for guarantees, and guarantees are not forthcoming. Fully partial guarantee, full financial guarantee, they are not that forthcoming. So that is where, because banks want to transfer their risk. And then basically, if the SPV or the private sector can come up with a whole cost-inclusive project and properly planned, properly costed, and with the project is properly analyzed, because sometimes the project risks are not analyzed and are not mitigated, then it becomes easy for a bank to support this thing. Now, for banks, often than not, banks like where I used to work before in UB ask a lot of capital, big enough to finance. But some other banks are not have enough capital like that. So they will be looking for how to get other financial institutions or DFIs or like to support them. I also think another issue which I've come is the area of public sector capacity and corporate governance. Is a very key issue.
Tell us about, we've already covered capacity. Tell us what your thoughts are about governance.
Yes, governance is major an issue. And I will tell you why. In terms of efficiencies, in terms of accountability, in terms of transparency, in terms of fairness and participation. Now, no bank will want to finance a project that is solely 100% or 98% financed by the bank. That's why it now comes the issue of bankable projects. So the question is this project bankable? Is able to raise funds for itself? A bank there to support like let's say we have somebody, the country is doing maybe a kind of a road construction, and the bank is sure that after the construction of the road, there's some toll gate that will be collected, and the process is transparent, is fair, is innovative, is electronic, it cannot be abused. A bank will be interested in it. But where somebody is doing a kind of road construction project, and it's being said that, okay, at the end there will be collection of fee, and it's not electronic, and there are risks that this collection will be difficult to collect, the bank will want to back out. So that means that project is not bankable. So where God is not having enough participation in terms of equity or debt, it becomes an issue. When government is not having a kind of a framework to manage their PPP project, it becomes a difficult thing. When there are no process in place, when there are no institution in place, when there are no regulatory framework that is very robust and take care of every party, it becomes difficult for banks to finance, because most of the highest risk a bank can take is the risk of a bank, of a country. That is especially when the framework is not in place. So I think from the government perspective, the banks is looking at the efficiency of each government response, you're looking at accountability, you're looking at the participation of the government. Not that we want to construct a dam and the bank is giving $100 million. And government is doing nothing. It's not working.
That's a good point. Now, we are actually close to the last 20 minutes of our time at the panel here. There are two interesting themes that we've touched upon, which you haven't expanded on. And I'll ask each of you to factor that in. One is Lara mentioned early on the Maputo toll road and the economic effect of that. The second sort of related issue is there's an accusation levied from governments that the private sector does not take enough risk and takes a very high return, which is sort of related in my mind, at least, because to the extent we don't know the economic, we do not have metrics. And actually this ties on a third topic that we discussed, that when we do ESIAs, environmental social impact assessments of projects, that starts typically with a zero base and derates it down to what the negative impacts are. We don't, what are your experiences, and I'll start with Lara, in terms of articulating the economic, social, human capital, social capital, sustainability impacts of these projects, which can help redress this perception that the private sector doesn't take adequate risk. And I think this is probably more relevant in a sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa kind of context, if that makes sense. But please, I've said a lot. Please, do you want to weigh in, Lara?
So Vivek, I think, if I can say, part of the problem is that because these projects are so long-term, and we've touched already on the time it takes to develop a project before it even gets in front of financiers, whether that's third-party equity or lenders of whatever description, and never mind the time it then takes to negotiate if it is fairly well constructed and sort of developed and put together and ready to negotiate. And then there's the term of the contract once you sign. So you're probably all in on a large infrastructure project up to 40 years. That's the kind of time span from the time that a minister sits in his office. Let's just say it comes from a minister. You know what? This is what we need to do. From that moment to the end of that concession period can be 40 plus years. I was at the first briefing by the minister, actually I think with the DDG or the Deputy Minister of Energy in the 2000s, talking about the South African electricity market being opened up to IPPs. And there were people from everywhere. The room was full and everyone was asking questions. How? Eskom is a monopoly. This is never going to work. And you know what? It did work. It has worked. But it took a long time. And I think, so where I'm getting to, I say the problem is that there is a lot of misalignment of perception right across these projects and their development. There's a misalignment of how long they take to develop and how complicated they are to put together. And you can't get away from that. I know that everyone says projects take longer to do on this continent, and in many respects they do. I'm a partner in a Canadian firm. I see how things happen in Canada. But even they're complex. They're very, very complex. The regulatory framework is complex. The political framework is complex, contractual, and then there's just the realities of life. And where I'm getting to now is on risk. I think that governments and I guess sometimes citizens forget that when you hand risk over to somebody, you don't always know what that means. All you know is that within this box of what the words describe, it's yours to take. If it happens, it's yours, and if it doesn't happen, it was still yours, but you get the benefit of it not having occurred. And I think that's a really big issue. And even in the UK, you've seen the UK government change its face completely in its attitude to PFI. And I think that's partly because the deals were maybe slightly misconceived at the beginning, and nobody wants to see the private sector making undue profits hand over fist. But sometimes I think that that perception arises because maybe those projects just got lucky or were well run and didn't have to deal with the kinds of risks that can come at a project and eat at private return. There are projects around that I think we probably all know about where equity is not getting the return it banked on, And sometimes equity walks away, and I guess that feels really, really burns government. But sometimes they just sit in there. They just carry on. They hammer at it. They're taking less return than they expected, but they stick in all the same. And that's the thing about risk, is you don't know. You get in an aeroplane and you take the risk of being a passenger. You really don't know what's going to happen when you climb on that plane. And I think that to do these kinds of projects, you have, the key participants have to have a good understanding of what that means in the space of looking into a crystal ball. It's not, none of us can say what the risks are that will arise. We can say what the ones are that might arise, that have arisen in the past, and we can try and deal with them. But the essence of equity taking risk and getting a return for it is that he doesn't always know what that risk is.
Excellent, thank you. Judy, would you like to add to that? And and actually, feel free to speak about the Ghana and the Kenya experience if you'd like to.
So I couldn't echo Laura more. I mean, I think that, a good case study around how risk has migrated and how returns have migrated is, funny enough, the South African REAP program. That's an example. So, in round one, the risk transfer, the returns that everyone was asking for, not just lenders, but equity as well, were very, very high compared to where now tariffs and risk and margins and returns are anticipated under round 5. And the reason for that is exactly what Laura is talking about, is that when the market first got into this REAP plane in round 1, we didn't know what was going to happen, right? And we priced the unknowns, and you try to transfer the risk to the parties that you think are best able to deal with it, which is I think the fundamental premise of project finance. But as subsequent rounds were released and the deals that had closed started having proper track record, then you start understanding what risks you actually are taking, and then the price is indicative of that as well. So I think it goes back to the earlier point that I made around pipeline. It is important to understand that PPPs are complex. Asking the private sector to deliver a huge chunk of infrastructure, whether through a program or a singular project, is complex, and there's some risk associated with that. But as you have more pipeline and the market becomes more comfortable with the risk that they're taking, because you don't know how governments are going to act, like, for example, what we're talking about with regards to Ghana. So as we start having more track record, and then the pricing also becomes reflective of that, not just the pricing from the bank, but more importantly, also the pricing from shareholders as well. So it is important that we build that pipeline and we continue to deliver against that pipeline, because then the market becomes very efficient. You start seeing a secondary market also develop around those infrastructure projects, so that is not just the primary lending, but there are also there's also parties that are selling out after some years. But without the inventory, without the project, it's very difficult to get there. So that's why it's important to prioritize a sector or sectors that you want to focus on, and then consistently deliver projects to the market on that sector. And then you will see the risk transfer moving more to the private sector over time, and you will see the pricing coming down as we start developing track record.
Yeah, very well explained. If I can add to that, the bulk of a tariff, about 2/3 of it, goes for equity return and interest on debt. But actually, it's the little bit that the principal repayment of the initial capex which actually drives all that. So what the supply base that I've talked to that has worked enjoyed the repeatability and the predictability that the REIPPP instituted. It also gave scale. Now, so one is, once a supplier of equipment or a construction contractor sees an ongoing long-term, year-on-year growth in business, or the possibility of, they will manage their risk and the pricing accordingly. From an investor's point of view, as you see additional, as one gets more comfortable with the risk profile of deals, the incremental deal, the first 50 megawatt project is a big deal, but if the 20th, 50th megawatt project doesn't really add the portfolio to that much, and that's where the trick. So I'll put it this way, that we have today covered actually risk mitigation quite extensively. What we're talking about now is aggregation. How do we create aggregation effect similar to what we saw in the REIPPP in other parts of Africa? That's the challenge that we are dealing with at AFIDA all the time. There's a third area that we haven't spent a lot of time is in terms of local content. And local content comes in the form of indeed jobs. We've talked about that, but also entrepreneurship. We don't see a lot of developers in country and outside of South Africa. We don't see a lot of lawyers and engineers in those markets. We don't see the pension funds and the banks in those markets. These areas, those are all opportunities that go towards scale up and reducing the risk, and in addition to the marketplace that we talked about and the economics. So we are, I'm trying to summarize here everything that we've picked up and some of the stuff that we haven't picked up. We are actually running, as a plug, AFIDA is running a survey on these sort of issues. I'll as a last statement, I'll set out where that's being done. It'll be lovely to get your inputs and everybody who's hearing here to take part in that survey. And actually, if we arrange the letters of what we talked about, sustainable infrastructure for all equals to local content plus aggregation plus risk mitigation, that sort of makes up an acronym called ALARM, ALARM. I'm offering a bottle of Scotch whiskey to anybody who can come up with a better acronym for scaling up. But so on this point, at this point in time, Bamidele, last word to you, and then we'll go to wrap up of a 20-second wrap up from yourselves. But Bamidele, local content. Do you see in Uganda the possibility that the pension funds in Uganda, the local banks, entrepreneurs, do you see them coming into the infrastructure sector? What is it going to take in Uganda?
Yeah, I think the key thing from my own perspective, when you talk about this, I'm going to talk about the two of them, is that about the risk transfer you mentioned. I think the main challenge is having a robust PP structure in place. When there is a robust framework for the structural model to adopt it. You see, the banks in Uganda, the NSSF, for instance, is ready to invest. They have to pool of funds in NSSF to invest. But there have to be apportionment of responsibility. And there are various PP structure models I'm aware of. There is what they call manage, operate, and maintain. Once you define our responsibility, our risk is in line with our responsibility. There's this word I work in Nigeria, build, own, and transfer, BOT. It works for us in Nigerian transport system. There's also build, own, and operate, and transfer. So when I think the banks that the NSSF that I know, the major pension fund in Uganda, has a pool of funds and is ready to invest. However, structure model, there must be a structure in place. There must be a model in place. They identify this is your risk, this is your return. And when that is in place, if government, if they see that risk in return in place, this is what I'm bringing on the table, this is what I'm going to get in. But there will be no problem. Though banks in Uganda, there might be need to syndicate to finance it. Nonetheless, they will. But what is not clear most of the time is that when bank is financing, they want to know what is the role of private sector, what is the role of government, and how does this project continue without any hiccup? Because a bank cannot finance a project, or a pension fund cannot finance a project that could not see a longevity and maintenance of that project. So the key thing here is that the project must have a structure in place. There must be a model that is guiding it. Are you just helping the providing a lease arrangement? Are you building to operate to transfer? Are you building operate to own and transfer? What is the model? I believe if this model is quite clear and all costs are brought into consideration, banks, pension fund in Uganda that know of will then unify first.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. We got 2 minutes left, and I think Judy has just dropped out temporarily. Laura, any closing remarks on how scale up of infrastructure, PPP?
Yeah, Vivek. It's been said in many different ways, but I think it's not the lack of infrastructure rollout on this continent is not about money. It's about soft issues. It's not about cash, it's about confidence. It's trust and and capacity and all those things. So that's what it comes down to over and over again. And we have project prep facilities, that was an unheard of phrase 15 years ago. Are they really working? I'm not sure that they're working as well as they should or could. I feel like if there was a way to attract private equity capital that's prepared to take high risk, be successful. If you back 10 projects, one comes to market, and it's long term, but you get good returns. It's expensive, I know that, for the particular project, but yeah, we just have to get the ball rolling. Once the ball's rolling, everybody's like, oh yeah, okay, yes, that's how it works. We can do this. But to get the ball rolling is so hard. I talked to a whole lot of university students from Uganda 18 months ago, and they were so excited. But I could see, as I was talking and the other speakers were talking, I could see them thinking, wow, this is so complicated. How do we even start?
It is.
And that's why there are so many players. You probably have 15 different players on a large project amongst advisors of different types for every player, and 3 or 4 key players plus subcontractors and whatever. They are very complex, but they do work.
So we're I think at the end of this, I would just say thank you to Lara and Judy and Bamidele for taking the time. We've had an interesting discussion, much to follow up on. And I would just final plug, please, anybody listening to this, go to our website, afida-africa.org. Take our survey, listen to what others in the private sector have to say about exactly these issues. Share your own views, and we'll share the results of the survey with everybody in due course. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers of Infrastructure Africa, and we shall look forward to staying in touch. All the very best and stay safe.
Good to meet you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Bamidele. Thank you, Lara.